It's the top of the hour and we can get started. Um, welcome everyone to the last session. Really glad that you hung out with us for 2 whole days, and we are here at the final session. And what better way to end by talking about our mental health needs. I think it's been a constant refrain and underlying conversation throughout the 2 days about everyone's mental health. And so I'm very happy to have with us Dr. Melissa Zarin, who comes to us from the Stevens Institute of Technology. And I want to give a quick introduction to Melissa. And Melissa is the Assistant Director and Coordinator for Outreach and Prevention at Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey. She is a licensed counseling psychologist and provides individual counseling to both undergraduate and graduate students, and supervises externs and pre-doctoral and postdoctoral interns who train in the center. She supervises the CAPS Peer Education Program, which she founded, and is the faculty advisor to the Active Minds chapter at Stevens. She is a co-developer of the Speak Up by Bystander program and a regular facilitator of the training. Further, she provides mental health workshops to student groups, Greek life resident advisors, and peer mentors on a variety of mental health topics. I'm really excited because Dr. Stevens also, Dr. Zarin also gave a really exciting TED talk, and her topic was on college mental health, learning to speak up, and that was one of the reasons I thought she'd be just perfect for this coming to this conference and speaking here with us. Thank you, Dr. Zarin, and welcome to MCC Advising Conference. Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you really for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here and also to talk about something that I consider to be so critically important. In my introduction, as you heard, I do a lot of outreach and prevention, and I also have in that capacity the opportunity to work with a lot of faculty, staff, advisors on Stevens campus. I work very closely with many members of the student life department, and that really gives me a good insight not only into the counseling center situation, but what a lot of my fellow staff are going through. So I'm really so pleased to be here today and talk about a lot of the things that have been on my mind, and hopefully by the end of today be able to leave you with some very tangible tips and resources to help guide you as you move into the fall. I think part of why this is so important is that, and why I was so happy to talk about it, is that we don't often give this enough attention. We all work in very student-centric environments because we're in higher education. But as this last year has proven, we all too have experienced very similar things to students, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I thought to get us started, because I know you've all had a very busy 2 days, that maybe you would engage with me in a little pause in our time. It's actually a tool that you'll now have, but I thought we could start. This is the way I often start many of my meetings, many of my time with students, and I thought we all could use a little pause today. So if you're willing to just take a moment, this is called the stop meditation, and you simply just stop what you're doing. You put your hands in your lap, ground your feet, or whatever position is comfortable for you, and just stop and pause. And as you do that, begin to take a few deep breaths very mindfully and rest back into your body and feel those breaths. And as you continue to breathe and pause, I'm going to ask you to observe 3 things right now. First, I'd like you to observe just how you're feeling. What are your thoughts right now? Without judgment, just observe and let them go. Now I'd like you to observe what your body might feel like and do sort of a body scan from head to toe Just observing and noticing what you're feeling. Is your head achy or tired? Do you have a headache? And if you do, just notice headache and let it go. Do your arms feel heavy? Just move down your body and just do a quick body scan. And the last thing I want you to observe is what sights or sounds or senses, things you might smell right now. And when you feel ready, your P will be proceeding mindfully and being more present and being more kind to yourself. And then we'll begin. Okay. So that's your first tip and tool that you may now keep in your arsenal of tools. So let me go over a little bit what we're going to talk about. First, we're going to talk about the need for TLC for our faculty, staff, and advisors. We're going to talk about the impact of the pandemic. We're going to talk a little bit about how to support ourselves as we move forward, and then how to support our students while still supporting ourselves. And then at the end, I have several slides of resources for you to help you do that. So why the need for TLC? Well, as I mentioned before, we all work in a student-centric environment. And throughout the last year and a half, I know the majority of my conversations have been about student mental health, student success at school, and I suspect many of yours are as well. And of course, being in higher ed, it's to be expected this should be our focus. But we know that even before the pandemic, the needs of students had grown so much, and the pressures on staff and faculty and advisors to meet those needs was really difficult. We know that burnout was a topic, compassion fatigue was a topic, and that there was starting to be more conversations about the impact of what students needed today versus say even 20 years ago on our own health and mental health. In addition was the need for more trainings and for more awareness around what staff needed. However, the pandemic happened and we moved forward into now talking about retention and keeping students at school. So I started to do some research to get some data, and it was actually pretty challenging to find data. Believe it or not, a lot of it is on faculty and not completely on staff, but I did find some pretty significant studies. So this past October of 2020, the Chronicle of Higher Ed did a survey, and out of that survey, they reported about 2/3 of the 100+ faculty who participated felt very or extremely stressed and fatigued in the past month. So this was the return to school. The American Council on Education, ACE, found that the mental health of faculty and staff members was the third most pressing concern for college presidents. And lastly, the Boston University School of Public Health study reported nearly 30% of professors who were surveyed had 2 or more symptoms of depression. I suspect if they had surveyed most of us in student affairs in different capacities, that number would have been pretty similar as well. So what it tells me is that slowly we're beginning to take a closer look at what the needs are of our campus, of those who work on our campus. And if we take a closer look at the impact of the pandemic, we'll begin to understand why this year has been so taxing on all of us and why it continues to be. So I thought it would be interesting to put up in front of you first the student experience. So our students this year went to virtual learning for many of them, right? Went to studying in their houses and their beds and not really leaving. They experienced loss, death and illness of family members or friends. Perhaps they had losses such as life events, jobs, internships, and financial hardships. We had many students really struggling financially. lots of family stressors, right? Lots of people living at home, perhaps parents losing jobs, siblings at home, taking care of siblings. We had a lot of political stress this year, right? And this really deeply affected many students. I've had a lot of students say for the first time they were paying attention to politics and what was going on. And we also had students experiencing a lot of racial trauma and the impact of what had happened in the past year. Right? So if we look at all of those things, we begin to understand why this topic is so important as we move to the fall. How have our students been coping and dealing? And obviously every school is different and has a different amount of resources to deal with these issues. But let's take a look at our experience this year. And we're going to see something interesting, right? We too went to virtual teaching and advising. I know, as I'm sure many of you, within the first 6 weeks of the pandemic, I think I learned 3 or 4 new platforms to be on and off of at all times. We, as members, had our own loss. For some of us, it could have been death. Some of us got COVID and illness. Loss of life events. For many people, they actually were furloughed, depending on what was going on at the school, or had significant others lose their jobs. We lost life events. I know, as the parent of 2 college students, we didn't have graduation. So I too lived through this, as all of you. So I would imagine as I'm going through this list, it feels very familiar and something that you can relate to. Financial hardships. I suspect that for many of us sitting here today, this was something we all faced. Challenges that came with job changes and cutbacks. Family stressors, right? Again, being at home maybe with all of our family members, or having to take care of small children and still do your job. Political stress. We all lived in the same political environment. And racial trauma, right? But here's 2 differences that we were faced with that maybe our students weren't. Institutional demands. So I know that for many of us, suddenly overnight, we were asked to do more than we had already been asked to do. We need to put things online. We need to reach students who are all over the place and maybe don't have internet. We need to learn how to do, in our case, it was learning how to do virtual therapy. So this isn't to criticize the institutions, but to say we now had this added burden, right? That differs from the student. And lastly, we were supporting our students during all of the same things that we were going through, and we were supporting our coworkers as well. So you begin to see that for faculty, advisors, and staff, right? This is why our mental health is so fragile right now, why we are tired. And what this led to was burnout. So that I believe at the end of last May, when we were all starting in this process of realizing the pandemic wasn't going away and we were going to be online and we were facing all these changes, burnout became an issue. So what is burnout? It's a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. It occurs when we feel overwhelmed emotionally, drained, and unable to meet constant demands. And as the stress continues, you begin to lose the interest and motivation that led you to take on your role in the first place. And I really believe towards the end of May into June last year, there was a tremendous amount of burnout going on. I know that many of the staff members that I spoke to and many of the people I interacted with, they really needed the summer to regroup and get a handle on what this new year was going to look like. And I know this past spring, very similar state of affairs, right? After this very long year of, I'm going to call it chaos and change, I think many of us were feeling very burnt out and could not wait for May to appear and for students to be off site for a little while or off Zoom so that we could all catch our breath and figure out our next plan. I just wanted to show you the difference between stress and burnout. And the reason we need to talk about these things, because the effects of both, neither are good, but both can lead to very damaging things. So if we look at stress, which we've all been under, it's characterized by over-engagement. I would imagine we've all been working multiple jobs this past year. Burnout is characterized by disengagement. So you begin to lose interest in what you need to do. With stress, our emotions can be very overreactive, very hyped up. And if we're feeling burnout, our emotions are just blunted. We lack caring anymore. For stress, it produces an urgency and a hyperactivity. And for burnout, it produces helplessness and hopelessness. For stress, there's this loss of energy. Whereas when we're burnt out, we just lose our motivation, our ideas, and our hope. For stress, it can lead to anxiety disorders, right? We know that anxiety is now the #1 issue across the country in mental health, followed by depression. And burnout leads to detachment and depression. For stress, the more stressed we are, the more it can damage us physically. Whereas when we're feeling burnt out, it can be emotional damage. And that physical damage may kill you prematurely if you're overly stressed. Whereas for burnout, it may make life seem not worth living. And so whether you're feeling stressed or whether you're feeling burnt out, my hope is that I'll give you some ideas or tips on how to better manage it, but it speaks to the fact that we all need to step back and figure out how to do this in higher education where the demands on us are greater. Some of the things that are contributing to this burnout, as I've mentioned, #1, we're all in a helping profession, right? Our job is to help students, and it doesn't matter in what capacity. And if you're in a helping profession, you're already more at risk for burnout, right? Institutional demands, again, what we're being asked to do constantly. I know this past year for me, at every turn, we were asked to do new programming, new Zooms, new activities, and constantly being asked to change and adapt. Work-life balance, very hard, right? If we're working from home, as much as there are some pluses to that with not commuting, I had a full house at home with everybody sort of floating around. And how do you manage your job and being able to do that? And student demands as well, right? What the students need, what they're dealing with, and being able to manage it. And lastly, the lack of mental health resources. We provide, many campuses, counseling services to our students, but not to our faculty and staff. And we don't yet have enough information to be able to help our faculty, staff find those resources. My hope today is I'll leave you with some of those as well. And so many times we don't know what to do and how to do it. So how do we support ourselves? How do we help ourselves? What do we need to do? So I'd like you all to take out a piece of paper and do this along with me. And a pen. I want you to make 3 lines. And the first thing I want you to look at is your self-reflection. Right? I think this is a really important, these are 4 sort of steps to help yourself begin to support what your needs are. And I want you to ask yourself, how was I personally affected by the pandemic? What stressors have I experienced in this past year? So just take a minute to jot down a few. Then I want you to ask, how am I self-preparing for the fall? So what does my fall look like? Am I going back to work 5 days a week? Have I already been in 5 days a week? What changes have I had at home? Do I have to think about childcare differently, right? What scheduling issues do I have moving forward that I didn't have this past year? The sooner you begin to look at those things, right, the sooner you're able to plan appropriately as opposed to have it creep up on you. This is a process that I'm doing myself. So again, we start with self-reflection. How was I affected by the pandemic? What stressors did I experience this year? How am I preparing for a return to normal? Then ask yourself, what is your self-care routine? What do you do to take care of yourself? I think this is really a very key part of this conversation is our self-care, something we don't all necessarily prioritize. And I often teach students that if they don't prioritize it, it affects them being a student. And I think it also affects our being a job, doing our job. I know for myself, I became acutely aware of some of the stress I was experiencing in the last few months and knew those moments when I needed to take a walk and I need to catch my breath. And the last question you want to ask yourself is about self-awareness. What are my limits going to be with students, right? What are the boundaries that I need to start setting? So if I know that I experienced a lot of death and loss this year. I know that's going to be a hard topic for me with students, and I'm going to have to change that conversation or help students find different resources, right? Or I know that I need to set better boundaries around answering emails because I did a lot of that this year because I was home. Okay, so I would encourage you to keep asking those same questions as you begin to sort of look at your own mental health. The last thing to ask yourself, and this is something that I've started to talk more and more about with my colleagues and students, which is self-gain and silver linings, right? Silver linings, we're probably all familiar with the phrase. We usually reference that when there's something, a brighter side to a problem you're facing, right? It comes from the fact that every dark rain cloud has a silver lining. This isn't to say that I want you to ignore your experiences this past year, your losses, or your challenges, but it's to start asking a different question, which was, did I gain anything while I was in this experience, right? Was there anything good that came out of it? So when asked for some people, some of those answers were, I got to spend more time with a loved one that I wouldn't have normally spent. I didn't have to commute. I know for me, I'm not excited to commute again 5 days a week, right? So it's being honest about things. Some people told me they took up a hobby that they wouldn't have had time for otherwise. Many faculty that I asked this question read books or caught up on TV shows. They spent time with their pets. Some people spent time with their kids, which was a mixed bag, but at the same time, if they had teenagers or college students, that was time that they maybe didn't have in the past. And for others, they exercised. So take a few minutes and challenge yourself to think about, did I have any silver linings this year? Did I gain anything as well?
Dr. Zarin, do you want them to put any comments in the chat?
Sure. That'd be great.
Do you want to use the chat to share what your silver linings are?
Yeah.
Raising my dog's puppies.
Mm-hmm.
More time to cook. No commute, ate a full hot breakfast. No commute meant time gifted back to me. My dog, I gained so much. Started exercising, lost 35 pounds. Took virtual yoga. Deepened spirituality. Slept in more. Slept in later. Spending time with kids. Mm-hmm. Right. Naomi says, we work on a quarter system, so we don't get a lot of downtime, especially during summer. It's usually just when we do, and the summer has been quite crazy for us.
Yeah. Spending time with kids and family. Could spend more time with kids and family.
Spend more time reading, healthier, said Christine. Yeah.
So thank you, everyone. So these are the things we need to hold on to, right? So somehow we need to find and put these things back and continue to have them in our lives, which is going to be a big challenge as well. But I think it's important to focus. There were a lot of gains for a lot of people. And I think that's why there's a push now to change how we work. I'm not sure how yet that will translate to higher education, but I am a supporter of it. So those are the things in terms of doing assessment. And I think it's ongoing and something you can continue to ask yourself because it will highlight areas where you're struggling. And again, with the silver linings, the idea is beginning to change our conversations. And this is something you can do with students as well to talk about, okay, so all of these things were bad, but were there any things that were good? Were there any things that happened that you did like? And it's a way to begin to change their mental health a little bit too, to kind of find that balance. So as we all return back to this new normal, whatever it may look like, how do we support ourselves at work? And I have some ideas that I wanted to share with you. So the first is check-ins. I think this is a great way to start conversations with our coworkers, a meeting, or even in class. This is something that we do in CAPS when we start our staff meetings. We tend to just do a check-in. How are you? How is everything? What's going on with everybody, right? And I think this is a great way as colleagues to just check in and say, are you okay, right? How was everything going? It's also a great way to start a meeting if you're having, like I said, in my case, our meetings, and I'll talk a little bit about it being a great way to start a class. It sort of also demystifies that we have lives outside of school, and it demystifies that things happen in those lives. It also helps do something which I call cultural change. And I think this is something that all of our office, mine included, need to work on, which is how do we talk more openly about mental health, self-care as part of our own culture, right? We need to live what we speak about in a way. And so I think checking in and asking how people are, or checking in about your exercise routine, or learning to cook and making that part of our conversation changes culture. It also lends itself to making sure that within the office, we're doing important things for ourselves, like take lunch breaks. So I think changing the culture is really important. Training. So this is a little hard because this takes funding. So there are some really important trainings out there, gatekeeper trainings, something called Question, Persuade, Refer, that help you better understand mental health so you can identify it. But if you're a school that doesn't have resources or trainers to do that, there's so many free online trainings, and I'm going to give you two main organizations that you can turn to at the end. If you are the head of a department, then you then find a way to bring in maybe a webinar on mental health, or find something even soft on like desk yoga. See if anybody in your environment teaches that and would be willing to do a little presentation. So there's lots of different alternative trainings. They don't all have to be heavy, but I think it lends itself to training the culture, right? If we teach a chair yoga class, we're saying we want you to take some time out during the day and make sure you do that. Boundaries. So this is going to be a challenge. Right now, we've all been leading somewhat of a boundary-less life. We're working from home, so I get on at meetings at 9 o'clock with students because I can. I don't know what that will look like in the fall. So that should say KNOW, my apologies. Begin to think about what are your boundaries going to be as you move forward in the fall. When is your day going to begin, and when is your day going to end? And really be clear about that, right? Really be clear with your students, with your coworkers. If you need to leave your office and your day ends at 5, you need to leave and walk out the door at 5. If you're choosing to stay late, it should be on your terms if you can. And make sure if you're working late that you take it somewhere else if you need to. And along that lines, taking a break. Most of us, and I can't say everybody, I don't know everybody's schedules, but the majority of us probably are supposed to take a lunch hour. I will say in my own office, this is a culture change that we need to work on. We don't all do it, but we've been working harder. And especially because I supervise trainees, I actually really force them to take lunch breaks because it's not, so that's something I'm very keen on, that they need to walk out the door. And I would encourage all of you to take a break, to leave your desk, get some fresh air. I think it's really important that we take care of ourselves in a very, very busy day. So how you're able to do that, just do it and make sure that you do it. I sometimes just take walks. I go outside and I just stand outside because I need to breathe air, even in winter. And again, these are all part of the culture within your office. And last, having a self-care plan. So as we've been talking about, there's been a lot of gains this summer. And so part of thinking and planning for the fall is sort of thinking about your own self-care. So how do you address your physical, social, emotional, and workplace needs? And sort of taking a moment, and you can jot those 4 areas down, and beginning to focus on how you're going to do all of these things and keep them in there for the fall as well. And part of that comes from, right, assessing the things that we've been assessing, right? So if you know that you have found exercise, how are you going to keep that in your self-care plan as you return back? And I'd be remiss as a psychologist not to say, don't be afraid to seek therapy. I really believe that coming into this year, we're all facing new unknowns. We're not sure what we're going to face in terms of students and even our own reactions. And ask yourself some questions. Am I struggling, right? As you do your assessment, did I go through a really severe, let's say, loss? Did I lose someone I loved and I haven't been able to grieve yet, or even attend a service for them? And if so, do I have an employee assistance plan, right? Many universities or many HRs have EAPs that can help you find a resource. Am I familiar with my own insurance card, right? What do they offer? And if not, have someone help you understand how it works. And do I know how to answer this? Who can help me with these questions? And something I always tell students, because we're supposed to be very strong, right? We're the staff members, we're the ones taking care of people, is that asking for help is a sign of strength. If we recognize in ourselves that we're struggling and that we need to support ourselves to move forward, then we are taking care of ourselves, and that is a strength. It is a different way to look at seeking help. And so I really want to encourage all of you, if you need to, don't be afraid to seek therapy. What we're finding is the more students who just talk out their experiences, the better it has been for them as well. So these are some things to think about with your own employee or to get familiar with this summer. I also will have a list for you at the end. Okay, so now how do we support our students at the same time as balancing our own needs? So first, let's understand what our roles have become, right? So we're educators, right? This is the role that we were hired and expected to do. So I was hired to be a psychologist and do counseling, and that is my role. For many of you, you were hired to be advisors and advise students. For some of you, it was to teach students. We know, though, we have also become gatekeepers for many, many students, and this is why the need for training staff and faculty around mental health has grown. We know that we will encounter a student with a mental health problem, whether it's walking down a path at school or in class where they have a breakdown. So we've become gatekeepers. We've also become parents. I know in my capacity as a psychologist, I've also had to work with students around many, many issues that are more parental than they are anything else. Because many of our students today just lack emotional and academic skills to succeed. They lack resistancy, they lack the ability to understand certain things. And so we've had to take on all of these roles. And so I think we start there. So how do we do this with students? So here's a couple of ways that you can begin to help yourself and do this summer. First, resources. Know your school's resources. Know what your school offers as far as if they have a counseling center, how do I refer a student there? If they have what's called a BIT team, which is a behavioral health team or a care team, it's usually a resource where you can report a student of concern. Right, so if you know and you're worried about a student, so see what your school offers. Try to understand how a student gets referred for help. Do they go to the dean? And understand that process. That way you're prepared in terms of knowing what to do to refer a student. You can also become familiar with some of the national resources your school probably promotes as well. Most schools have a list. So this would be the first thing I would say, take time this summer, especially as we don't know how our students will be in the fall, to understand the resources on your own campus. I do a lot of teaching around this at my campus to make sure our faculty know that they don't have to be the therapist. They can refer the student to the appropriate locations. Second, use your syllabus or your class time or your emails as a way to promote those things. So some schools actually have a statement about mental health they can put in a syllabus. But you can also use your syllabus to convey your hours and your boundaries and be very clear in those things. This is when I will respond. This is when I won't respond. You can also use your class time, right, to talk about some of the issues in the past year. And I would encourage all of you, if you're faculty, to be open to just talking with the students in the first class or two about their concerns about coming back and about handling their classwork again, especially for those who were first years and weren't even on campus. You can also use your email. In my email, you'll often find many 800 numbers for emergencies or different things like that. And you can also check in with your school about what you can and can't promote, but use these as tools. As well, you can put in your boundaries. I will not respond to emails, after 5 o'clock or whatever your time. Letting students know up front. Check-in. Remember I had mentioned check-in, and this goes back to that. A colleague of mine shared that she teaches that for the first 5 minutes of her class, she usually checks in with the students and asks them just, how are they? What have they been up to? It's an opportunity for her to get to know them and an opportunity for them to get to know the professor and feel a little more relaxed in class and especially get to know each other. Talk openly. Don't be afraid to talk about 2020, 2021. Students will be anxious returning back to campus. They will be probably challenging to return in terms of getting back into a routine being a student again. And so I think talking openly to the best of your ability is really the way to go with that, and just acknowledging this was a hard year. We know coming back is going to be hard and it will take time. Be patient. Please be patient. Remember, our students need to learn how to be students again. We need to learn how to, in some ways, go back to work again. And so I think if we all give ourselves really a couple of weeks of the first semester to kind of take a slow step in, don't expect our students overnight to remember how to be students, and they're also going to be very excited to be back on campus, possibly. In addition, there will be some who are struggling to not be back on campus. And last, I can't say it enough, you need boundaries with yourself, but you also need boundaries with your students. So be really clear with what you can and cannot do. Be really aware if you cannot engage with a student on certain topics, that you know how to refer them the places they need to be, right? As well. I think that just students will need a lot of boundaries right now because they're used to emailing at all sorts of hours and expecting responses. So these are just some of the ways that you can begin to help students. And lastly, I didn't want to just throw all of these things out, but I did want to leave you with some national resources that you can really gain from. And I want to also say that I do not profit from any of them. These are resources I give students and I share with also our faculty who ask, but two in particular organizations to really become familiar with is the JED Foundation, and the other is the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Both are national organizations and have websites chock full of resources and trainings that you can do for free and use, and they're quite good. And they also have resources for students and different websites to go to. So it's a great place, especially if you are a school that doesn't have a lot of funding, but you want to do some kind of training within your department, you can take a look and see what they offer. In addition, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has many trainings that they do and many walks that they sponsor. So they will sometimes do those trainings for free. And if anyone is interested, they can also email me and I can help connect you. Two apps I really like to recommend is Headspace and the other is Insight Timer. These are meditation apps, especially as we return to commuting. I'm going to be doing a lot of meditation on my train ride. Headspace is, their premise is that 10 minutes a day can really help you with your self-care. And if you have an EDU, I believe it's only $10. Some institutions actually get it for free. Insight Timer is one of my favorites. It's a good one. It's completely free, and they have people from all over who are able to do different kinds of meditations and body scans along the lines of what we did today. So these are one of my 4 favorite. The other is crisis resources. So I wanted to leave you with some resources that you could keep on your desk and have handy. These are national organizations. So the first is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline hotline number. This is very good and handy to have. What I like to do, and it's also part of culture, right, is you can print out or get magnets and just pop them up on your door, right? So it's just a very soft statement that you support mental health, right? The other is the text hotline. So there's 2 versions. The first version is the general. This is a free text that all students can use or adults can use, where you can reach out 24/7, and it doesn't have to be if you're suicidal, but it can be about if you're just in stress, and someone will respond. And they are trained and they are overseen by social workers. The bottom is specifically if you text Stevie, is if you're a student of color, if you're a young person of color, then that will indicate, and they will help get a clinician or a person to answer with the color. The other 2 are the LGBT National Hotline and the Trevor Foundation. So these are all really great resources to start to have in your space or on your desk or even in your syllabus or email. And again, what it does is it changes the culture. It says, I am open to talking about mental health. I'm also aware of what's going on in the world in terms of mental health. And if I can't help, I know where to send you in that. And the last slide I wanted to share is resources to find a therapist. So I didn't want to just say, go find a therapist and not give you resources. And these are a list of different ways to find a therapist that could help you if that's what you're looking for. I believe these are all national. And so you can start Psychology Today is a great resource. You can do it by your own insurance or what you're looking for. And your own insurance website. It can be challenging to look for a therapist, but what I always say is a little bit of work, you'll be able to do it as well. So these are another really good list of resources in terms of doing that. And with that, I wanted to leave time for questions.
I think, thank you, Dr. Zarin. That was really informative. We have one question that's come in here. Did you say you can get a free Headspace account with an EDU account email?
So some institutions do. You can get an, I believe if you Google Headspace, student Headspace with your EDU, it's $10 a year. I know that some institutions, like in my business school, they arranged for it to be completely free. I think they're really open. So if someone is interested, they can reach out, but I know that they offer for EDUs, it's $10 a year.
Do we have any questions for Dr. Zarin? Any questions? I think someone's typing something. Just a second. We have 5 minutes. Well, we have less than 5 minutes. Right. Yes, Gloriella, we will send out the PowerPoint with all of these. I think one question that comes in is, what are some tips to explaining work boundaries to a supervisor?
That's a good one. So I think some tips would first think about what boundaries you want to have, right? Be really clear in your mind what the boundaries are that you need to set and why. And then when you speak with the supervisor, I really like to say stick with I statements. So I need to do this. I've been thinking about this, and also the facts, right? So the facts are, in the past year, this has changed in my life. So I really need to end my day at this time. But I think being very clear on what the needs are, so that's that reflection piece of sitting down and thinking, okay, this is what I need to do. Because I know that when a supervisor, they need to hear very clear and direct what the need is and why the need is.
I think not sure why it's doing that. The other question is, what are some things that you incorporate into your daily routine to promote self-care?
Oh, mine? Okay. Sure. So in the very early days of the pandemic, I was having a really hard time. I walked my dog. And what I'm realizing in some ways, one thing I'm looking forward to even though I'm not looking, as you've all heard me say about my commute, is that I used to walk the dog very early in the morning, like 6:30. And there was something very peaceful and calming about that. So that's one thing that I do. And I'm starting to train her now in terms of getting back to routine a little bit. I exercise. I love exercise. It's something that in the prepare slide. So a lot of these slides I've been trying to live myself. I have been trying to figure out how I'm going to return to exercising and going back to work. I used to exercise on campus. I won't do that anymore necessarily, and the gym's under construction. So I will be taking walks more often, and have spoken with my colleagues about that, how we're all going to support each other in taking breaks as well. And so those are some of the things that I do. I've also, in terms of my self-care, one thing I haven't been good at this year is my hours, because I've been home and sometimes I get spurts. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is my boundaries around hours in the fall and my schedule, because I do work evenings and I do work a lot of extra hours. So I'm trying to set my own boundaries as well. But I know for me, these are things that I'm thinking, how am I going to put back into my life as well? And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I tried to take up a hobby, but I'll be transparent, I wasn't good at crocheting, but I really tried. And it didn't quite work out, but it was fun to try.
Dr. Zarin?
Yes.
There are some comments coming in about your phone number. Is there an extra digit in there?
There is. I apologize. It's 201-216-5067.
Okay.
I thought I caught everything. My apologies.
We have lots of people saying thank you for being so transparent, and just talking through this. Just a really good session. I think we all needed to hear this. We're all feeling it.
Yeah.
So it's good to actually kind of have some tangible resources to go with it. All the attendees will get Dr. Zarin's presentation with all of these information. And the other thing, I think we had one more question here, and I think we have time for one. No, we don't. It's 4:15. We do have James Cloyd on just to wrap the whole thing up. Yes, he's closing the session. And so thank you, Peggy. Thank you, everyone who attended. But James has a few words. And thank you, Dr. Zarin, for a wonderful presentation.
You're very welcome. And anyone is more than welcome to email or give me a call if they have questions. I'd be happy to answer or talk further.
Absolutely. Thank you. Great. James, take it away. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, on behalf of our president, Randy Smazel, I'd first of all like to thank Dr. Zarin for her timely closing presentation as we return to normal. I know my silver lining during this time, the pandemic, was yoga and baking. So you had to find those hobbies somehow just to stay sane. I also like to just take this opportunity to thank Dr. Nazir and the rest of the committee for the work they've done in hosting another fantastic Zoom conference. I know we set the bar high last year with the work that was accomplished, and it was great to see that everyone was up for the task again this year. And without a doubt, we're stronger together. I'm just really proud of our college, our institution. 5 years ago, we were told that we needed to improve academic advising and some other things, and we were going to a lot of training activities. And now here it is, 5 years later, and we're hosting the training and we're hosting a conference. So kudos to the team, kudos to Metro, and let's look forward to safely returning back to campus and taking advantage of some of the tips and some of the lessons that we've learned today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who joined us. Thank you very much. Have a great evening, everyone.